Hi, folks. In the decade or so that I spent in the company of Hart DeFouw's Jyotish guru Mantraji, one of the most memorable things that he said to me was something along these lines. Jyotish is God's work, and God guards it jealously. If this were easy, everybody would be doing it. Now, sometimes it seems like everybody is doing it, but we must admit with mixed degrees of success. And I think this is nowhere more evident than in the subject of the AMSHAs, the vargas, the so-called divisional charts of Jyotish. So there are a lot of, mixed ideas out there about how to interpret these, and there are a few that really seem to know exactly what to do. Admittedly, there are different methods. Hart DeFouw, and under the guidance of his guru Mantraji, spent many years studying the subject of the AMSHAs, the vargas. And they leaned very heavily on the work of one Seshadri Iyer, a 20th century Indian astrologer who was also a brilliant mathematician, who himself had spent decades studying the AMSHAs, the vargas, and subsequently wrote two books, New Techniques of Prediction, volumes 1 and 2. Good luck trying to, sort out, the proper methodology in applying his ideas, because unless you have a teacher, frankly, it's quite difficult. But Hart, with his guru, and subsequently Hart did correspond with Iyer to sort out some of the, finer points of his methodology and got all of that squared away. And, over the years, delivered a one-week course on the subject of the AMSHAs, the vargas, in his intermediate course of the trilogy program. Now, Iyer's method, can be boiled down to some seemingly simple principles, but of course, like anything else, there are many caveats and specialty rules and all the rest of that. But the basic principles, go along these lines. You can interpret the AMSHAs from a static point of view, to declare something about, brothers and sisters through the Drakana, about the spouse or love relationships through the Navamsha, to discuss the career through the Dashamsha. But of course, there is a very dynamic element to AMSHA Vichara as well too, which, Iyer strongly recommended, observe the dasha that the client is going through, and then analyze the AMSHAs specifically with respect to what that dasha lord was doing in the respective AMSHAs. And then, of course, the fine-tuning of all that involves looking at the current Bhukti Lord as well, too, and then, as all astrologers are wont to do, to look, further down the timeline and see what dashas are going to run later, and, of course, the cycle of the Bhuktis as well, too, to allow, some finesse in the interpretation of the AMSHAs in light of various departments of life for the client. So the basic principles are along the lines of, there are positive and negative houses in the AMSHAs. I mean, quite simply, house 3, 6, 8, and 12 are the Dishtanas, and those are negative houses. So Dasha lords and Bhukti lords placed in those houses, with some exceptions, will prove to be problematic during their periods for the subject covered by the AMSHA itself. So, if you've got Venus in the 6th house of your Drakana, well, it may be that during the Venus Dasha or Venus Bhuktis, one or the other of your siblings may have a rough time of it. If that Venus is placed in the 12th house of the Dashamsa, well, it may be that, you will have problems in your career during Venus Dasha or Venus Bhuktis. And the other houses are positive. So 3, 6, 8, and 12 are Dishtanas. The rest of them are positive. So if you're running Rahu Dasha and you have Rahu in a positive house of the Navamsha, it could very well be that you will get married or enjoy a major relationship, notwithstanding the nature of Rahu, but Rahu can bring many good things, as we all know. So the planet, the Dasha Lord, the Bhukti Lord, in a positive versus a negative house will determine, broadly speaking, the nature of the period within the context of the department of life ruled by that AMSHA. And that's a very important distinction. Venus may be beautiful in your D3, D4, D7, D9, but it may be terrible in your D10. And for that matter, maybe the health vargas as well, too, D6 and D8. I say D as an abbreviation for divisional. There's that. That's a basic rule. Now, there are benefics and malefics, as we're quite familiar with, and those are pretty much the same, except for the moon is a conditional benefic unless it be within 6 tithis of a new moon, in which case it's regarded as a malefic in the Rashi, and it will carry that malefic quality into all of the amshas as well. There are lots of rules, and we're not going to try to cover all these in this intensive that I'll be presenting at the 2020 version of the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference, which will be online this year. So some of the other things that Seshadri Iyer introduced are somewhat unique. He has this concept of soul enemy. So in any amsha or varga, you have benefics, you have malefics. They can be placed in positive houses, they can be placed in negative houses. They may be under the influence of malefics, they may be under the influence of benefics. And all of these are, sort of the influences upon planets that we're familiar with in the Rashi, and they're also evident in the amshas as well. But Iyer introduced this somewhat unique notion of soul enemy, which, in the order of the Vimshotri Dasha sequence, the 6th Lord removed from the planet under discussion will become that planet's soul enemy. So, for instance, for Saturn, if you count inclusively, 6 dasha periods away is the moon. And so the moon will become the sole enemy of Saturn, even though the moon is a benefic for most charts. Similarly, Rahu, its sole enemy is Venus because it is 6th away in the dasha sequence, even though it be a benefic. So every planet has its sole enemy, and some of them are obviously malefics and some of them are benefics, which kind of confounds our reasoning, but there you have it. And so when you come to analyze, what's going on with any given planet in an amsha, you have house position to consider, you have its own strength or weakness, whether it be in its own sign, exalted or debilitated or whatever. It's in influence, is subject to influence by malefics or benefics, and or a soul enemy. All of these are considerations. Now, yogas play a part in the amshas as well too, but in Iyer's methodology, he says do not include any yogas that involve house lordships. The amshas are a little bit, volatile themselves, as we're all too familiar. If the birth time is off by a few minutes, the ascendant of any high harmonic amsha will change. And that throws off that whole house lordship thing. So he advocates not doing that. But there are many other yogas that are independent of house rulership. Chandramangala yoga, for instance, Kesari yogas, and there are a number of others. Iyer also introduced another concept called Sankhya yogas. And I won't try to discuss it now, but it basically involves planets equidistant from a line of symmetry that runs through the first and seventh houses of the particular AMSHA. And this is another wrinkle and very useful technique that again can produce some remarkably confounding predictions or judgments. Last but not least, in terms of this little promo overview, Iyer uses the karakas to some significance in their relative charts. So we're all familiar with this concept of karako bhavo nashto, where, for instance, if Venus is in the seventh house of Rashi, Venus karaka of relationships in the seventh house of relationships, that potentially becomes problematic. Well, there's an equivalent in the Amshas as well too. If Venus occupies the ascendant of the Navamsha, so Venus karaka of relationships, Navamsha, the Amsha dedicated to relationships. If Venus is in the ascendant, the first house of the Navamsha, that may be problematic as well too, and there are rules to sort that out. Anyway, there are a multitude of broad and general principles which you can use to immediate effect as soon as you've learned this methodology. And of course, there are multiple, caveats and subject to conditions that must be sorted out, and that's sort of for a more advanced study. But the whole Iyer methodology is fascinating to say the least, and for those who don't have a handle on the Amshas, the Vargas, put this on your agenda. It's going to be very valuable for you. Okay, so hope to see you there virtually. Until then, stay safe, stay sane.